Hi, everybody. It's Adrian Pass here.
Yes, and Bridget. Hello.
Now, I have not a thought in my head at the moment, but I think you have. What do you think?
What? As to which
Oh,
number?
by the way, no, it's number 218.
Yeah.
Then sounding the shadow. Sorry, I should have said that. Yeah. So what's going on in your mind?
Well, okay. I have been thinking about the extraordinary juxtaposition of what's been happening in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, on the one hand, and I know we mentioned them last week, we'll probably mention them again, the things that have been going on in our country, the riots, some people have called it thuggery, and some horrible things happening. On the other hand, there's been some very good things happening with people standing against the worst of just plain outright anger and all that stuff. And then there's the Olympics. And I suppose the thing I felt was in the Olympics, and we did watch a lot of it, didn't we, Adrian?
We watched.
Yeah, we do love it. And I think what we love is the difference, is the fact that people from all over the world, looking completely different from each other, are taking part. I know that isn't an even thing, and I've been thinking about that a lot. I mean, for some countries, in the West in particular, we have whole programs either funded by lottery or funded by other things, which mean that our athletes and our field whatevers can train full time. And then in other countries, obviously it's something that you might do on a Saturday. You need to push yourself really hard without that sort of support. But nonetheless, it's a love of difference, isn't it?
It is. And also, once or twice, at the moment, there are a couple of stories about famous sports people, which show really quite stark differences.
Tell me what you mean by that.
People, about their lives and the way they conduct themselves through their lives. Huge differences in approach, and why not? I mean, everybody is different, but what is interesting is that they have in common this drive to become the very best they can at what they do. And at the point where you line up on a track or you go out into the field to do shop or something, at that point you bring everything you've got.
Everything you've got.
And
then people who are not going to get up at 4 a.m. and go into swimming pools or run across hills or run round tracks or throw shot puts or whatever it is, are saying, well, Britain didn't get as many gold medals this time as they did last time. And yet, as you say, every individual has tried their very, very, very hardest. I do love it. I love in particular the joy in people when somebody does well, and I love the support for each other that you see at the end of a race when they all tangle onto the floor and crawl across to congratulate the person who has managed to beat them by a few seconds. I love all of it, really.
Well, that varies too, doesn't it? I mean, in some sports, as far as one can see, because the margins are so tiny, people understand exactly what's happening with the other people who are competing. And you do get the feeling that it's not mechanical, but it has to happen, that you understand losers and winners in that situation.
Well, that's an interesting thing, wasn't it? If you then look at what's been happening in this country, and I know happens in many countries, really. We had a very interesting email this week from somebody in Canada that challenged me a lot, Adrian, because it made me realise that very often our understanding of something is based on being with people who think similarly to us. And this person was saying, that you're on the, well, I think he thinks we're very on the liberal end. I would think, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But he was making the point that it's very easy to not understand the other side, to not understand what he would call conservatism, what we might call right wing. And he said people who've got to a boiling point of anger and frustration and are coming together to make a point. And of course, that's true. The problem for us And I think for many, in many situations, is that it doesn't quite reflect what happened. There were a lot of people who already had orders against them for thuggery, for bad behaviour, for looting, for various other things, that enjoyed a Saturday night out in which they could turn over police cars and set fire to them. So it's always complicated, isn't it?
And so, so yes, there was a mix there, as a mix everywhere. And we were saying last week about the man who was on the other side, who was making those ghastly appeals to the anti-racist crowd to do horrible things to the rioters, and really completely destroying any platform he ever had. But it did make me think, I mean, for the last 40 years, I've often thought, who do I respect within society, but also within the church? How do you remind yourself that there are no special people, and that there are only special people? That's the great conundrum in the church, isn't it? That everyone you meet is the most important person in the world.
Well, that's why I liked, I heard it on the news, but then I read it in the thing that Justin Welby wrote in The Guardian about what's been happening. And to be honest, it was a very balanced report, if you have a chance to look at it. But he was talking about the Imam Adam Kelwick. I don't know if I pronounced it right. And the other worshippers at the Abdullah Quilliam, probably not pronounced that right either, mosque in Liverpool. But he was saying the first ones I approached, this is the Imam talking, they acted as if I was invisible and they couldn't see me, because it was like seeing an alien, somebody the other side. We've seen it in Northern Ireland, and I'm sure people from other countries know exactly what we're talking about. It's invisible. You don't see them. And he said that the more that he talked to people, the more, and kept smiling, which I thought was interesting. Said, I just kept smiling and continued to be friendly, and then went on to the next group until finally we broke through to somebody's heart and they accepted the food. And then everyone started taking the food and we started discussing things with them. We had some really, really genuine interactions. Maybe 4 or 5 people, I asked them, what exactly are you protesting against? And no one had a clear answer, which goes to show how frustrated and how misguided a lot of people are, and how easy it is, whichever side you're on, to cling to something and think, right, now I know what I think. Now, for a moment, I belong to something. We've talked about this before, I know. But that was just smiling and going on. It's such a quiet but very strong way to go. I mean, we are talking about somebody coming into the middle of a group of people who were throwing stones, setting fire to them, and who would like to hurt you.
Yeah. I find it very interesting. It kind of made me, as I tried to say just now, think about who I judge, how I judge them, what I expect them to be like. And I think, absolutely honest, I think I am more confused now than I have ever been, other than that I hold close to my heart a true belief that whoever is put in front of me is crucially important to God. I mean, I don't know other people think about that, but that is what motivates me when I contact people or talk to people.
And that's clearly what motivated these people to go out and to think, what can we do to represent who we are? We'll take food. Food is always good. Food is always a winner. But I also thought, years ago, you talked about the way of grace of Jesus. And that's why I found the email for suggesting that some of the things that we say are almost completely liberal. But the way that you described the way of grace of Jesus was between the rock of the law, which is impassable, and the swamp of license. And I know this person mentioned a movement in Canada called Leave Our Children Alone. And it's to do with the fact that increasingly there's such a swirling movement towards wanting to be accepting of everyone, but actually imposing things on small children, in which apparently in Canada there's a strong movement towards them saying they can choose which pronoun they will use about themselves, whether they are he, she, and all the other things that go with in between he's and she's and all the rest of it. So in a way, although that's supposed to be liberal, it's actually imposing something onto people, which is controlling, although it's supposed to be the opposite to controlling.
Well, it has ever been thus, hasn't it? And it happens in communities all the time that people can talk about freedom and liberty and all those other sort of chewy words. But when it comes to it, most groups end up with a controlling influence. They want someone to sound sure. They want someone to say, okay, I've sorted it. This is it.
Yes.
This is how we should think. This is what we should do.
Yes. And that means people move to the edges. And I'm quite sure that the person who wrote from Canada, while talking about some of the rallies that he's part of and some of the movements that he's part of, would also, well, I don't know because I don't know him, but I'm quite sure would say, you've moved one way, I've moved another. But we constantly have to check whether we're moving too far one way and listening too much to one group of people. And that's why I think there's this really hard time for people as they swing from one thing to another, trying to find that way of grace, that way between the rock of the law and the swamp of license, because that's the hardest and toughest road, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It would be much simpler for people who are of the Christian faith, I think, if it weren't for the fact that Christianity, in one sense, has no rules about that, apart from the ones about valuing other people. But what has always disturbed me is that I continually find myself judging people in certain ways, quite unconsciously, actually, and believing things about what they could or couldn't do or should or shouldn't do without even thinking about it. And it's very difficult. Then I realize, and I think, if I'm, again, completely honest, but surely, that person there, the way they think and what they do, surely if you remember, there was some, years ago now, we met a couple when we were doing something somewhere, they were having problems. And I remember I prayed very briefly for them. And I thought, well, it'd be nice to see them again, but we probably won't wonder what. And then much later on, we heard that they encountered some people who I thought were the last people in the world they needed.
Yes.
And they had benefited hugely from what they said to them and their attitude to the problems that they had. Yeah. And I could feel the readjustment in the whatever it is of my mind as I accepted something I'd always said. I believed that the power of love works. There's only one source for it, and the way it works is to bring beneficial change in people. In case it all sounds a bit woolly, actually, it's an ongoing learning process for me. It's actually one Jesus talked about all the time.
Yes, and he showed by his life it wasn't that simple. And I was interested in something else that Justin Welby said, because I did find this really sound stuff. And he's saying reconciliation after the riot would require research into the deep-rooted causes of division and facing uncomfortable truths. Those communities left behind in our country's race to growth reflect the rich and precious diversity that is our nation today. I just thought, yes, that's it. You know, it is a diverse country. It sort of happened without us perhaps realizing just how diverse we are. And in some areas, we're not diverse at all. And we can very comfortably stay with the people who live or think exactly like us and not touch onto other things. And that is always going to be a danger, especially, as I say, if you get together with those people who think like you. But to really tackle it, and I mean, we mentioned before, working with children, I remember you saying that, you know, the equation was sad, mad, then bad. And for a lot of those people on our streets over the last 2 or 3 weeks will have gone through that. They'd have been sad because things broke up in their families and because there was very little hope. Maybe become mentally disturbed because they didn't know how to fit, and then become pretty bad and allow themselves to express anger in a way.
Nice and easy for those who judge easily to decide that they're very negative. What should happen to them?
But I do appreciate what this person in Canada said, that we must always challenge our minds and our thinking, that we don't just fall into any traps, you know, of knowing what we think about absolutely everything and therefore relaxing. It's always been tough.
Yes, in the last book I wrote, I was writing about the story of the Good Samaritan, which is, of course, a very familiar one, about the chap who's beaten up by robbers, and 2 or 3 people come along who really should have helped him, but don't. And the Samaritan, of course, at that time, Jews and Samaritans were at loggerheads very seriously. So.
Well, and I think they were invisible to each other. You know, that word invisible that the Imam used, you know, a Samaritan would be invisible. You wouldn't see him, and vice versa, maybe.
The Samaritan takes him, spends money, leaving him with someone to look after him, and that's all fine. And the whole thing began because someone said to Jesus, "Who is my neighbour?" Which is a crucial question in the centre of what we've been talking about, really. Who is my neighbour? And he said it to provoke him, hoping he'd say something that would be controversial. And as usual, Jesus, knowing you've got to own your own decision about these things, told a story. But the end of the story I find really interesting, because he says, "So who is your neighbour?" And the man doesn't want to even say the word Samaritan. He says, "I suppose the one who helped him is the one who was the neighbour." And he says, "You need to go and do likewise." Now, we always assume that there's one simple meaning to that. That is that whoever is in need, we go and help them. And the differences don't matter. The really challenging thing is that I think there was a strong suggestion there of him saying, you have to accept assistance from the people you regard as vastly inferior to you. You
or totally different.
Totally different. You who can hardly speak their name. Are you able to be someone who is able to be, I don't know if the word humble is right, but to be aware enough of the need for people to see through the differences, to take help from people. Now, I think I have trouble with that. There are definitely people I would look at them and say, well, I don't think you'd have anything to offer me.
Because you think differently, because you live differently, because you are different.
Way of doing things. But actually experience, as suggests, growing experience, is that people who are not like you may well have something to offer.
Yeah.
I know it's obvious, but those things are so ingrained in us.
Of course.
So one or two of them in me. But I have also to say, that I would love to be sitting among a group of people who all think the same as me. I used to be able to do it when I was in certain kinds of churches and certain kinds of people, but I'm more confused now and more weird around the edges than I've ever been.
Solitary road, Adrian. I mean, we've said this before. We can be together on the road, but your road is a solitary road, isn't it?
It is a
and I think everybody's is really, and should in a way be, because it is our road and we are on it individually, and so just merely joining in with one thing or another, whichever, whether they're the extremes or whether they're just comfortable middly ones, we've still got to set out on our own road, on our own way of grace between the rock of law and the swamp of license.
That paradox is an alarming one, isn't it?
It's scary.
You have to be who you are, but not give yourself the ridiculous idea that you are superior in any way to anybody else.
You know what? I think we set up for ourselves, Adrian, some very interesting discussions, and it would be great to hear what other people say.
Maybe we are the group who.
And as always, we do actually genuinely love receiving your emails, and they do challenge us. And sometimes they make us laugh, sometimes they make us cry, but they always challenge us. Thank you for saying.
Yeah, it's really, really good of you to get in touch. So you continue to do that. And we'll go and sort the rest of the world out.
And see you next week.